Chapter 16. A few days later, Harry asked Brenda if she was ready to get back together. She said no. The divorce was already final, emotionally. Brenda was sorry to lose the marriage, but not sorry to lose Harry. She started dating after Harry left, but the weekly encounters took on an ominous and menacing aspect, whose roots reached into Brenda's past. The actions of Brenda's father had set up an internal time bomb, and the detonation occurred when Harry walked out. In her mind, the crimes of Lewis and Harry became one, and the accumulated resentments were united in one concerted vendetta against the male sex. There was something cold and ruthless in the rage that enabled Brenda to systematically search the personnel files every day at work, locate all the married men, and one by one invite them to her apartment, where she seduced them. Brenda told herself she would go down the list until she found one who refused to bed her, and only then would she stop, and believe that virtue, that honor existed in the world. She remembered reading Byron or Shelley, who said, "I go until I am stopped, and I am never stopped." She did not seduce each man looking for another commitment. She was convinced that was a lie. There was something unspeakable in the way she sought out only married men, for the seduction of a husband destroyed the sanctity of his bed. With each man, the desecration of her own bed would be avenged. It was inevitable. She had predicted it to Jamie years before. She had shocked him, and she could still see his blue eyes as he looked quizzically at her. The wind blew, and a wisp of his blonde hair fell across his wrinkled forehead. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Brenda Jean replied, leaning against a mottled gray rock on the beach. "Sex is a weapon. Now I could hurt people if I wanted." She brushed some sand from her toes. "Explain," James said. "Jamie, just what I said. Sex is a weapon, a tool to get what you want from people." James laughed uneasily. "Brenda Jean, I didn't teach you about sex so you could do that. Besides, men use it as a weapon too." The corners of her mouth turned up a little, and the smile was not pleasant. "You're wrong. Women learn it sooner. By the time she's 15, a girl knows what her sex is and how she can use it to manipulate, to control. Men don't mature until they're in their early 20s. By then, the women have been controlling them for 5 or 6 years. Sex is only special if it's new, Jamie. It's new, it's exciting, and there's time for all that romantic fluff people decorate it with. But if sex has been a part of your life for a long time, then it has no magic. It's just like sneezing or burping." Jamie eyed her warily. "You're kidding, right?" Brenda Jean shook her head. "Ever since my daddy, it doesn't mean anything to me, Jamie, really, except for you. Nobody has ever touched me, truly touched me, except for you. Nobody ever will. If anything ever happened to you..." Brenda Jean held him close. The wind blew around the couple, whipping their words away as they spoke. How long ago that had been, but truth never dies. Even Dr. Gray had warned her. She could almost see him reading it to her from his book. Her promiscuous sexual pattern is related to the sexualization of the love relationship with the father, the search itself revealing the need to find a replacement for the lack of caring love in early life, the need to find approval and acceptance. Our inability to enjoy sexual activity is at least partly the result of residual guilt in the father relationship. She has a tendency to attach herself to men who are cruel to her, who fight with her, or even attack her physically, as was true of the father, who also loved her. How else to explain the abominable fruit of her father's crime? How else to explain Brenda's frenzied revenge, a one-woman assault bent on returning evil tenfold? She herself had predicted it to James, a natural reaction to events from years past, in accordance with the same law that powered jet engines or drives rocket boosters into space. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The books claimed Brenda didn't enjoy sex. She enjoyed it, but sex was only a physical outlet. What Brenda really wanted, nobody had to give. Nobody loved her like James. Nobody ever would. A little bit of love is better than no love. Even a bad love is better than no love. Even a sad love is better than no love at all. When Brenda felt low, she would sing this song. It saved her more than once from taking the easy way out of her father's house through suicide. After James was gone, Brenda fought hard not to kill herself, but her songs convinced her that if she could hang on to reality, some better life waited. Brenda heard the song after Harry left, and its lyrics played inside her mind as she pulled another personnel file from its folder and read, Martin, John S., married. His office was 4 cubicles over from hers. She could meet him for lunch. The next morning she watched him over coffee. I've got some peanut brittle. Want some? Brenda's eyes were veiled slits as she shoved the plate toward the man. What? Never mind. Brenda munched another piece of the Commandant's peanut brittle. She would never be hungry again. Was it good for you? The tone in Brenda's voice was flat and unconcerned. John Martin looked into her narrowed eyes, then looked down at his coffee. To tell the truth, Brent, I feel pretty shitty right now. Telling my wife I was going out for overnight exercises. What a crock. Brenda noticed the red blotches around his eyes. Oh? You're good looking, Brent, don't get me wrong. But I've got a good wife at home. A damn good one. I don't want to hurt her. She'll never know about us. But I always will. The soldier stood up and walked to the door. He paused in the doorway. Life's more than just a good fuck, Bryn. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. No, it won't happen again, Brenda heard herself say, as she watched him get in his car, and she was amazed to hear herself say it. She lit another cigarette and listened to the distancing hum of his car on the highway, taking the present with him, leaving her with the birds, the trees, and the wind, and the voices that were never gone. Come on, Brenda Jean. Let's go look at the mountain. From across the years, Brenda could hear her brother's voice. They ran and played in leaves the color of cinnamon and ginger, and Grandmother was making Christmas tea for the neighbors tonight. Alan and Betty Ann aren't getting any younger, she reflected. Maybe I ought to call them, Brenda thought to herself. South Mountain is so beautiful this time of year. Never again did she wonder at the liberty of men to violate their marriage, for she had done unto others what had been done to herself. Never again would she wonder whether pleasure alone was the reason for infidelity, for she knew from personal experience it was not. Brenda learned that love exists and that it resists temptation. She was assured there are such precious things to be obtained in life, although she had paid a great price for knowing it. The Army ruled that single parents had to show alternate custody for their children in case the parent was sent to a war zone. Brenda had no family she depended on, so she soon lost her job as well. Life moved on in its old familiar pattern. Brenda and Tracy were trying to survive again. Forced back to waitressing, Brenda had to sell the house. Brenda still had her daughter, though, and she still had her health, and the promise she had made years before echoed over and over in her head. No one will hurt me again. Brenda stirred her whiskey sour and watched the live band at the little club where she dropped in each Friday night. The separation had not dampened her spirit. In fact, Brenda looked trim in the snug blouses she favored. The years in the Army had given her a ramrod carriage, and her erect posture accentuated her breasts. A man in a suit stopped by her table and extended his hand. Hi, I'm Jerry McClanahan. I'm the manager of the club. May I sit down? Brenda eyed him warily, then nodded. What can I do for you, Jerry? She continued, stirring her drink. Well, at the risk of sounding forward, I have a proposition for you if you're interested. Brenda stopped stirring. What kind of proposition? She said evenly, taking his measure with her eyes. Well, Brenda? Your name is Brenda, isn't it? Brenda, I also own another club on Hayes Street. It isn't much, but we turn a nice profit. Anyway, starting salary is $400 a week plus tips, and I know you could make more. His voice dropped as he ended the sentence. He knew he had a deal. What do you think, Brenda? Brenda looked down to the table, past the open collar of her blouse, past the gold crucifix that glittered against her breast, reflected even now in the manager's narrowed eyes. Hayes Street. A polite way to describe the Sunset Strip of Fayetteville. Nobody makes that kind of money waitressing. Is it a strip joint or a topless bar? The salesman grinned. "Well, little lady, you get right to the point, I can see. You've got it pretty close. A topless bar." Brenda remembered Peanut Brittle. She remembered what she was, what she must be after the years with her father. She remembered the daughter who depended on her. The topless waitressing he wanted might lead to bottomless services at $1,000 a week, and Brenda knew she could do that too. I was a prostitute, she reasoned. Didn't make the money in an official capacity. No, she reasoned again. Prostitutes make love by the numbers, numb the hurt they once felt at the hands of one man by inviting the hands of the many. I could be stopped. I was stopped by John Martin. He cried the morning after, and because he cried, I stopped. Stopped the mindless screwing. Yes, I stopped because I'm still searching for a dignity I haven't found. But he cried. God help me, he cried. Sounds great, Jerry, but I don't think so. You'll be sorry, Brenda. You've got a great body for it. Yeah. Brenda stirred her drink and watched the band. The next man in her life was married and waited 6 months before telling her. As callous as Brenda thought she was, she could not violate another marriage. As hopeless as her marriage had been, it failed because of its participants, not because marriage itself was wrong. She couldn't do to somebody else what Harry had done to her those many times. She realized her promise had two sides. If she was never to be hurt again, she would have to allow others the same privilege. The morality she had lost somewhere between Frederick and Fort Bragg caught up with Brenda at last. The rent was due in a week, requiring money she did not have, but Brenda still possessed all the important things: her daughter, her car, and a growing belief in herself. In spite of 25 years of struggle, she had survived. Winter was coming soon, and Brenda saw many days from inside the unemployment office. On these days, she would gaze through the frosted windows and reflect on the scenes from her life as they floated down through the years like falling snow. Her grandparents, her brother, her bike, her cat, James, her daughter, her army career, her father and her husband, and the cold hatred those last two had sparked within her. Most of all, Brenda thought of the deep, unsatisfied need for devoted love which had never died within her, although her life was a parody of the word. She wondered what purpose God could have in bestowing such deep emotions only to see them wasted. Somehow, and for some unknown purpose, Brenda had survived. Somewhere between a Monday and a Friday, Brenda made another vow. She would survive again, if only to hear God's reply. Brenda stared out of the window of her cramped kitchenette. She had fed her daughter and put her down for the night, hoping Tracy would not get up crying like she had yesterday. Brenda had stumbled wearily into the apartment that evening, tired from the endless round of employment offices, vainly looking for work. She had done the bills until almost midnight, groaning inwardly as she worked and reworked the stubborn figures. No matter how she divided her pitiful savings, there was no denying it. The car note would have to go unpaid until further notice. She made a note to ask the bank if she could make interest payments. She had hoped that by selling the house she would have a little extra money, but the extravagant bills Harry had accumulated during their marriage soon absorbed that. Soon the credit cards would be paid off, but Brenda had no job, and there were only 3 boxes of macaroni in the cupboard. There was no more money to buy food with. Fireflies darted past the window, tiny light bulbs blinking against the velvet black sky. Brenda lay her head on her outstretched arm across the table. She stopped to rest for a little while. She did not move, a statue in the dim interior, lit by the small table lamp. Exhausted, Brenda drifted asleep. Her last thoughts concerned the pantry, and in her troubled dream there was another bare cupboard high above her head. Her brother was standing next to her, smiling and holding her hand. "Junior!" She wanted to squeal in delight, but her voice would not come. Junior looked strangely tall, and he had the face of a child. It did not matter. Margot had failed. Junior had come back to the sister who loved him. "Look," Junior said, pointing upwards, and in that instant a black cloud of roaches emerged in a humming mass from the pantry, and Brenda knew they had devoured every scrap of food. Brenda felt herself falling, and her hand grasped instinctively at the lamp, almost tipping it over. She shook her head, still feeling the trailing remnants of the dream. Glancing at her watch, she rose from the table and walked to the bedroom, grasping each piece of furniture for support in her dazed half-sleep. Gratefully, she fell upon the bed and slept soundly for a little while. It seemed like only minutes, but Brenda heard an alarm clock. Just like the one in Hopkinsville, she thought, but thank God I'm not in Margot's house. This is my apartment and my bed. Brenda turned over, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, clutching empty sheets beside her. Harry is gone, she remembered. The bed felt warm and inviting as she pulled the coverlet to her chin. She turned, reaching for the edge of the blanket, and her fingers froze. She felt an arm. Someone was in bed with her. Brenda opened her eyes dreamily. She saw her father sitting on the bed, taking his pants off. "I'll always love my little girl," he said with a grin. Swinging her legs in one convulsive movement from the bed, Brenda missed her footing and crashed into the nightstand, sprawling in a heap beside the bed. Jumping to her feet, she looked in vain for Louis, but he was gone. She shook her head violently, trying to clear it, her eyes focused on the clock beside her. The luminous green hands showed 4 in the morning. Dragging herself into the kitchen, Brenda brewed herself a cup of coffee from yesterday's grounds. There would be no sleeping now. She ran her fingers through her matted hair, wet with perspiration. Her heart was still beating wildly, as if she had been running. She groaned, realizing it had all been a dream, a horrible dream. Her brows furrowed as she stirred the cream into the cup. She had a similar dream when James was alive on Okinawa. The dreams of roaches would die away for years at a time, a vague memory of her starved infancy, but the dream of her father was constant, occurring every 6 months or so. It never changed, only the color of the room, or the clothes he tore from her. Of all the dreams and nightmares common to man, she shared this with one other man on earth, and she realized this dream would follow her no matter where she moved, no matter what she did, for as long as they both lived. There would be no end, and she could not remember the beginning of this madness, only the mindless infinity shared with Louis Campbell. "My father," she said softly, and as her lips pulled away from her teeth, the expression was indeed frightful to look upon. She remembered Joshua B. Donovan, the man who gave Harry Donovan what few morals he possessed. She remembered Harry's stepfather sitting at the table after dinner, arguing some point in the Bible with her. What was it he always said? "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without the will of your Father. Are you not worth many sparrows, Brenda Jean?" Ah, but that was years ago. Joshua Donovan was dead now. Brenda remembered her grandparents, who still waited for her in Frederick. She thought of Tracy. Except for her mother, the child had no one. Brenda remembered her short career in the Army. She had received the Distinguished Service Medal. She had rewritten operating procedures for the entire 5th Corps, and she had done it all by herself. And she could do it again. Worthy of many sparrows? Brenda Jean Donovan stared at the reddish tinge of the trees outside, and her smile was as slow as the sun creeping over the horizon. She watched the smoke as it rose from her cigarette and filtered past the sun-filled window, like defeated spirits parting. She would have to choose whom she would serve. No, she had already made the choice. She had made it the day she went down and down the list of married men and finally stopped. She had affirmed it that night at the bar when McClanahan offered her the topless waitress job, and she said no. A friend had just moved to Houston. Said there were a lot of jobs, come down and take a look. At least she would have a place to stay until she got settled. Brenda sighed, stubbing out her cigarette in the ashtray. Now it was time to make the choice again. She had to admit the choices were getting easier. She reached for the little phone book. Her grandparents would help her. She would get the car out of Hawk. She would take Tracy with her, and she would find out if Joshua Donovan was right about the sparrows. After all. Dear reader, Brenda never had access to this help, but you do. Your success begins when you begin to do the work yourself. A dear friend has passed this information to me to help you get to a good place in your life journey. In the U.S., you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or National Domestic Abuse Hotline 800-799-SAFE or 800-799-7233 or the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, RAIN, National Sexual Assault Hotline, 800-656-4673. National Runaway Safe Line, Hotline, 800-786-2929. Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, 800-422-4453. Women in Distress 24-Hour Crisis Hotline, 954-761-1133.